The blue-white pulse of the Meridian battle station's warning systems cast eerie shadows across Command Officer Chen's face as she stared at the tactical display. 17 coalition vessels, gun. Just like that, the Orcs fleet had torn through their defenses like tissue paper, and now the outer colonies were falling one by one. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Rivera's voice cracked slightly as he looked up from his console. "The Helios mining outpost has gone dark. That's the third settlement this week." Chen closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself exactly 3 seconds of grief before the mask of command settled back over her features. 10,000 souls at Helios. 10,000 more names to add to the grim tally that had begun 6 months ago when the Orcs Dominion had first appeared at the edges of settled space. "Status of the remaining coalition forces?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Scattered. Retreating." The Valari ships took the worst of it. Their crystalline hulls weren't designed to withstand Orcs plasma weapons. Rivera's fingers danced across his console. "The Goran have pulled back to their home systems. The Kel are requesting additional support for evacuations." The stark reality was growing clearer by the day. The coalition of allied species, once a proud union of 17 spacefaring civilizations, was crumbling under the Orcs' onslaught. Their technology, their tactics, their very approach to warfare, none of it was enough against the ruthless efficiency of the Dominion's war machine. I in the observation deck above command, Ambassador Thrix of the Valari High Council clicked his mandibles nervously as he watched the holographic battle replays. His crystalline exoskeleton reflected the red emergency lighting in fractured patterns across the walls. "We were fools," he whispered to his aide. 10,000 years of peace made us forget what real war looks like." His aide, younger and less jaded, straightened her posture. "The humans have responded to our distress call. Their diplomatic vessel arrived at Proxima Station yesterday." Thrix made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Humans. What can they possibly offer that 17 advanced civilizations cannot? They've barely left their own system. Their technology is primitive. Their lifespans are tragically brief. Yet they've agreed to send aid. A token gesture. Diplomatic courtesy. Nothing more." The station's alert system suddenly shifted tone, the blue-white pulses changing to a deep, resonant pattern that neither Valari had heard before. On the command deck below, Lieutenant Rivera's eyes widened as he studied the incoming transmission. "Ma'am, we're picking up a new signal. Unknown configuration entering the Arcturus system." Chen frowned, moving to his station. "Arctur reinforcements?" "No, it's..." He trailed off, adjusting the sensor readings. "It doesn't match any known signature in our database. But it's broadcasting on coalition frequencies." The tactical display shifted, and a new object appeared at the edge of the system, a single vessel moving at speeds that should have been impossible for its size. Its trajectory was deliberate, cutting straight through the debris field of the recent battle, heading directly toward the Orcs fleet that was regrouping near the system's second planet. "Open a channel," Chen ordered, a strange feeling settling in her gut. "All frequencies." The communications officer complied, and for several long seconds, there was nothing but static. Then a voice, unmistakably human, filled the command deck. "This is Captain Alexander Blackwood of the Earth Defense Force Warship Vengeance. We received your distress call, requesting tactical data on enemy positions and permission to engage." The silence that followed was profound. Ambassador Thrix had descended to the command deck, his mandibles frozen in what passed for shock among his kind. "A single ship," he finally managed. "They sent a single ship?" Chen exchanged glances with Rivera before responding to the transmission. "Captain Blackwood, this is Command Officer Chen of Meridian Station. Be advised, you are facing a fleet of 27 Orcs warships. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safety." The reply came back almost instantly, tinged with something that sounded remarkably like anticipation. "With all due respect, Command Officer, withdrawal is not an option. The Vengeance was built for exactly this scenario. Transmitting our capabilities now. Suggest you watch closely, you might learn something about how humans fight." The tactical display updated with new data, and gasps echoed across the command deck as the specifications of the human vessel became clear. It was unlike anything the Coalition had ever constructed, not elegant like Valari ships or technically perfect like Goran designs. The Vengeance was brutal, practical, and built with a single purpose. "They're accelerating," Rivera reported, disbelief coloring his voice. Heading straight for the Orcs command ship. Chen leaned forward, watching as the lone human warship closed the distance to an enemy that had devastated 17 civilizations. Part of her wanted to look away, to spare herself the sight of yet another hopeless last stand, but something told her this time would be different. "Record everything," she ordered quietly. "Every second. Because I think we're about to witness the moment this war shifts." The human vessel opened fire. The Vengeance unleashed its first salvo, and the command deck of Meridian Station fell silent. No one spoke as they watched streams of what appeared to be conventional missiles, primitive by Coalition standards, streak toward the Orcs command vessel. The Orcs point defense systems activated immediately, swatting the projectiles from space with practiced ease. Ambassador Thrix clicked his mandibles in disappointment. As expected, their weapons are. His words died as the destroyed missiles suddenly split apart, each one becoming dozens of smaller projectiles that curved around the energy barriers, finding gaps in the Orcs defenses that shouldn't have existed. Explosions blossomed across the command ship's hull, concentrated at key structural points that Coalition intelligence had never been able to identify. "Tactical analysis," Chen demanded, her eyes never leaving the display. Lieutenant Rivera worked frantically. Those weren't conventional missiles. They're adaptive munitions of some kind. The targeting systems recalibrated mid-flight, and there. He paused, running the analysis again. "They're learning them. Each impact is feeding data back to the Vengeance's weapon systems." Before anyone could process this information, the human ship was already moving again, executing a maneuver that defied the tactical predictions of both Coalition and Orcs targeting systems. The Vengeance seemed to almost skid through space, rotating to bring its broadside batteries to bear while maintaining momentum in its original vector. "Impossible," one of the Valari engineers whispered. The structural integrity. The Vengeance fired again, this time unleashing streams of hyper-accelerated metal from what appeared to be railgun batteries along its hull. The raw kinetic energy tore through the weakened sections of 3 Orcs vessels, ignoring the energy shields that had proven so effective against Coalition energy weapons. "They're using kinetics," Rivera said, the disbelief evident in his voice. "Actual physical projectiles. The Orcs shields are calibrated for energy weapons, not obsolete technology," Chen finished, understanding dawning. "The Orcs evolved their defenses against the same weapons we use." On the tactical display, the Vengeance continued its assault, drawing the attention of the entire Orcs fleet. 5 enemy vessels broke formation, moving to intercept the human ship with the coordinated precision that had made the Dominion so devastating in battle. "Captain Blackwood," Chen opened the channel again. "You've made your point. 5 Orcs hunters are converging on your position. I strongly advise immediate withdrawal." The response came through a burst of static as the Vengeance executed another impossible maneuver, briefly vanishing from sensors before reappearing behind one of the Orcs hunters. "Negative, Command Officer. We're just getting started." The Vengeance was built with 17 redundant systems. "She can take a beating." As if to prove his point, the human vessel absorbed a direct hit from an Orcs plasma lance, the same weapon that had vaporized Coalition ships with a single shot. The impact left a glowing scar along the Vengeance's armored hull, but the ship continued fighting, seemingly undamaged. "What in the void are they using for armor?" Ambassador Thrix demanded, his formal diplomatic demeanor forgotten in the face of what they were witnessing. One of the human liaison officers who had arrived the previous day stepped forward. Lieutenant Patel had been quietly observing from the back of the command deck, but now she approached the tactical display. "Ablative armor with heat-sink nanostructures," she explained, her voice carrying an undercurrent of pride. "Designed to disperse energy weapons. The outer layers are meant to cook off, carrying the heat away from the hull." Chen studied the young officer with new interest. You knew what the ship could do. Patel nodded. The Vengeance is the first of our Retribution-class vessels. While your coalition was building exploration ships and terraformers, we were preparing for... She gestured at the tactical display. This. But why? Thrix asked. Your species hasn't even encountered the Orcs before. A grim smile touched Patel's lips. Humanity's history is written in warfare, Ambassador. For thousands of years, we fought each other. Nation against nation. Ideology against ideology. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. But we learned from each conflict, adapted, evolved our tactics. On the display, the Vengeance executed a series of rapid-fire missile launches, targeting the engines of 2 Orcs vessels simultaneously. The shots connected, leaving the enemy ships drifting and vulnerable. When we reached the stars and discovered we weren't alone, Patel continued, our leaders hoped for peace. But our military planners prepared for war. It's what humans do. Chen watched as the Vengeance continued its improbable battle against the Orcs fleet. One human ship was driving back an enemy that 17 advanced civilizations couldn't stop. The Orcs are regrouping, Rivera reported. They're adapting their tactics, trying to surround the Vengeance. Captain Blackwood's voice came through again, sounding remarkably calm despite the intensity of the battle. Command Officer Chen, I'm transmitting tactical data and shield frequencies. If your remaining ships can remodulate their weapons to these specifications, they might have better luck against Orcs defenses. Chen hesitated only briefly before nodding to her communications officer. Transmit to all remaining coalition vessels. And inform your captain that... A blinding flash cut her off as one of the Orcs hunters landed a direct hit on the Vengeance's port side. For a terrible moment, the human ship disappeared in the explosion. The silence on Meridian's command deck was deafening as everyone stared at the tactical display, searching for any sign of the Vengeance amid the expanding cloud of superheated gas and debris. Ambassador Thrix lowered his head, mandibles clicking softly in what his species considered a gesture of respect for the fallen. They fought well, he said quietly. For such a young species. Lieutenant Patel hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on the display, jaw clenched. Wait for it, she whispered. Chen glanced at her, then back to the tactical display just as Lieutenant Rivera's console began blaring alerts. Movement in the debris field, he shouted. Something's. The Vengeance burst through the remnants of the explosion, its port side blackened and scarred, venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. But it was still moving, still fighting, and somehow accelerating toward the heart of the Orcs formation. Damage report, came Captain Blackwood's voice, strained but steady. Lost 3 railgun batteries and external sensors on the port side. Sealing off decks 7 through 12. Rerouting power to remaining weapon systems. Chen couldn't hide her astonishment. Your ship should be vaporized. Compartmentalized design, Blackwood replied, and despite everything, there was a hint of dark humor in his voice. We assumed we'd take hits. Built the ship to keep fighting anyway. Lieutenant Patel stepped forward. Commander Chen, request permission to transmit Vengeance's shield frequency data to your defense systems. If we recalibrate Meridian Station's shields, you might be able to withstand direct Orcs fire. Chen hesitated only a moment before nodding. Do it. And get me a direct line to every remaining coalition vessel capable of combat operations. As Patel and the communications officers worked, the tactical display updated with new information. The Orcs fleet was adjusting, their formations shifting to counter the unexpected resilience of the human vessel. 3 of their ships were disabled or destroyed, but the remaining 24 were learning, adapting their tactics, and coordinating their attacks with increasing precision. This is Command Officer Chen to all coalition vessels, she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. The human warship Vengeance has provided tactical data that may give us an advantage against Orcs defenses. I am transmitting shield frequencies and targeting parameters now. All combat-capable vessels are ordered to regroup at these coordinates. She took a deep breath. We're going back into the fight. Ambassador Thrix stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. Our remaining forces were nearly decimated. And they will be entirely decimated if we do nothing, Chen countered sharply. The humans have shown us that the Orcs can be hurt. That's more than we knew an hour ago. On the tactical display, a dozen markers representing the scattered remains of the coalition fleet began to move, converging on the coordinates Chen had provided. Valari crystalline ships, sleek Goran cruisers, and the heavily armored Kel defense platforms, all of them battered, many barely operational but responding to the call. Inside the Vengeance, Captain Blackwood moved swiftly through smoke-filled corridors, steadying himself against the bulkhead as another impact rocked the ship. The bridge was too exposed after taking that last hit. He'd transferred command to the auxiliary control center buried deep within the ship's core. Engineers and damage control teams rushed past him, their faces grim but determined as they fought to keep the Vengeance in the fight. Status report, he barked as he entered the dimly lit auxiliary bridge. His XO, Commander Daniels, looked up from the tactical station. Her face was streaked with soot, and a hastily applied medical patch covered a burn on her left arm. Port side railguns are gone. We've rerouted power to starboard batteries. Missile tubes 1 through 6 are operational, but we're down to 38% of our original payload. And the Orcs, sir? Adapting faster than predicted, sir. They're coordinating their attacks, trying to overwhelm our point defenses from multiple vectors. Blackwood studied the tactical display, his mind racing through options. The Vengeance had been designed to take on superior numbers, but even its revolutionary systems had limits. If the Orcs managed to concentrate their fire on the starboard side as they had on port, the outcome would be the same, only this time, they wouldn't survive it. What about the package? He asked quietly. Daniels met his gaze, her expression somber. Armed and ready, Captain. But you know what command said? Absolute last resort only. Blackwood nodded slowly. The Vengeance carried one weapon that hadn't been revealed to their new allies, something the Earth Defense Force had developed after studying fragments of alien technology recovered decades ago. Something they'd hoped they'd never need to use. Sir, his communications officer interrupted. Multiple coalition vessels are moving to support us. Command Officer Chen is coordinating their approach. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd expected the coalition forces to stay clear after witnessing what the Orcs could do. Maybe there was more fight in these aliens than humans had given them credit for. Open a channel to Meridian Station, he ordered, and calculate a new attack vector. If we're going to do this, let's make it count. Back on Meridian, Chen watched as the remnants of the coalition fleet formed up, moving to support the damaged but still fighting human warship. It was a desperate gamble, but the Vengeance had proven that the Orcs weren't invincible. If they could coordinate their attack, use the human tactical data to penetrate Orcs defenses, incoming transmission from the Orcs command vessel, Rivera reported suddenly, his voice tight. Chen shared a look with Ambassador Thrix. In 6 months of conflict, the Orcs had never attempted communication. They attacked, they conquered, they moved on. That they would break their silence now, put it through, she ordered. The main view screen flickered, and for the first time, the command deck of Meridian Station saw their enemy. The Orcs commander's scaled face filled the screen, vertical pupils narrowing as it surveyed the coalition command center. Its voice was surprisingly melodic, almost pleasant, which made its words all the more chilling. Your human allies have proven interesting, it said, the translator struggling to keep up with the unusual speech patterns. But this display of resistance changes nothing. We have studied your species for decades. We know your weaknesses, your limitations. Your inability to make the hard choices that survival demands. Chen kept her expression neutral. If you've been watching us so carefully, you might have noticed we're not as easy to eliminate as you thought. The Orcs commander's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Perhaps. But we've only shown you a fraction of our capabilities. Did you think these were our main battle groups? It leaned closer to the screen. What you've faced so far is merely our reconnaissance force. Ambassador Thrix made a small, involuntary sound of dismay. Chen fought to keep her own expression steady. Tell your human allies that we look forward to studying their ship's remains, The Orcsir commander continued. Their approach to warfare is primitive, but refreshing. It has been too long since we faced a species that understands the necessity of violence. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the command deck in stunned silence. Lieutenant Patel was the first to recover. "They're trying to demoralize us," she said firmly. "Psychological warfare. It's as old as combat itself." Chen wasn't so sure. Intelligence reports had suggested the Orcsir forces they'd encountered were substantial, but if they were merely a reconnaissance element, a new alert blared across the command deck. Lieutenant Rivera's eyes widened as he checked his readings. Multiple spatial distortions detected at the edge of the system, he reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Massive energy signatures. I've never seen anything like this." The tactical display updated, showing a new wave of Orcsir vessels emerging from what appeared to be some form of faster-than-light transit. Not the dozen or so reinforcements Chen had feared, but hundreds of ships, an armada that dwarfed anything the coalition had ever assembled. On the auxiliary bridge of the Vengeance, Captain Blackwood stared at the same data with growing dread. The ship shuddered around him as another Orcsir blast found its mark. "Sir," Commander Daniels said quietly, "with these numbers, conventional tactics won't be enough." Blackwood looked at the tactical display one more time, watching as the coalition's rebuilt formation moved to support his damaged vessel. These aliens were willing to fight alongside humans despite overwhelming odds. They deserved a chance. His hand moved to a secured panel on his command console, pressing his palm against the biometric scanner. "Get me Command Officer Chen," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his decision. "Tell her I need to discuss the package." The encryption protocols on the secure channel between the Vengeance and Meridian Station took precious seconds to establish, seconds during which 3 more Orcsir vessels broke formation and accelerated toward the damaged human warship. "Captain, we have a direct line to Command Officer Chen," announced the communications specialist on the Vengeance's auxiliary bridge. Blackwood nodded grimly as Chen's face appeared on the screen. The station behind her was in chaos, personnel rushing to stations as alarms blared. Yet the command officer herself remained remarkably composed, though the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. "Captain Blackwood," she acknowledged. "Your ship has fought admirably, but those reinforcements change everything. The coalition vessels are moving to your position, but against these numbers, we have one more card to play," Blackwood interrupted. "Something we didn't disclose in our initial briefing. A weapon of last resort." Chen's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate being kept in the dark, Captain." "The decision wasn't mine," Blackwood replied evenly. "But right now, it's our only chance. We call it a gravity lance, reverse-engineered from fragments of technology we discovered 30 years ago in a derelict vessel at the edge of our solar system." Chen's eyes widened. "A derelict? What species?" "Unknown. Not Orcsir, not Coalition. The vessel's design was ancient." Blackwood glanced at the tactical display as another impact rocked the ship. "We never got it fully operational, but the theoretical applications were revolutionary. The lance creates a localized disruption in spacetime that collapses in on itself, generating a momentary artificial singularity." "A black hole weapon," Chen whispered, understanding dawning. "The gravitational forces would tear anything nearby apart. And then dissipate before causing permanent damage to the system," Blackwood confirmed. "At least, that's the theory. We've tested it at minimal power. Never at full capacity." Ambassador Thrix, who had been listening in shocked silence, suddenly stepped forward. "You found an ancient vessel? With gravity manipulation technology?" His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "Captain, did this ship bear any markings? Specifically, were there symbols resembling intersecting spirals?" Blackwood frowned, caught off guard by the specific question. "Yes. How did you end this transmission immediately?" Thrix hissed to Chen, his normally measured diplomatic tone abandoned. When she hesitated, he added, "Now, Commander." Chen signaled to cut the feed, but kept the audio channel open. "Ambassador, explain yourself." Thrix's crystalline exoskeleton had taken on a dull, ashen hue, What passed for pallor among his species? The precursors. Your humans found a precursor vessel. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Even Lieutenant Patel seemed stunned. You know about these? Precursors? Chen asked carefully. No. There are only myths, fragments in the oldest archives of all coalition species. Tales of a civilization that spanned the galaxy millions of years ago, then vanished overnight. Thrix's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. They were said to have mastered technologies that defied the laws of physics as we understand them. Gravity manipulation, dimensional folding, conscious matter. Over the comm, Blackwood's voice was tense. Ambassador, I don't have time for ancient history. This weapon might be our only chance against the Arxer Armada. You don't understand, Thrix insisted. The precursors didn't just vanish. According to the oldest texts, they were destroyed by the very technologies they created. A heavy silence fell over the command deck. Chen looked from Thrix to the tactical display, where the massive Arxer fleet continued its relentless advance. The Vengeance was maneuvering to avoid concentrated fire, but for every evasive action, 3 Arxer vessels adjusted their position to compensate. Captain, she finally said, is there any other option? None that I can see, Blackwood replied grimly. The Lance requires 3 minutes to power up. We need to get within optimal range of the Arxer command ships. And the risks? The pause. Considerable. The power requirements alone will leave us vulnerable. And if the containment field fails during activation? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Chen made her decision. Ambassador Thrix, with all due respect, we're facing extinction here and now. Myths and legends won't stop the Arxer fleet. She turned back to the comm. Captain Blackwood, you have my authorization. The coalition vessels will provide whatever cover they can to get you into position. Understood. Blackwood's voice was steady. Beginning power-up sequence. Transmitting targeting coordinates now. On the Vengeance, Commander Daniels had already initiated the complex sequence to bring the gravity lance online. The ship's lights dimmed as power was diverted to the weapon systems. Emergency generators kicked in, their low hum filling the auxiliary bridge. Power at 20% and climbing, she reported. 2 minutes 40 seconds to full charge. Blackwood nodded, his focus on the tactical display. The coalition ships were moving into formation around the Vengeance, creating a protective screen as they advanced toward the heart of the Arxer Armada. It was a brave gesture, but against such overwhelming numbers, a new alert caught his attention. What's that? Something's changing in the Arxer formation. His tactical officer leaned forward, frowning at the readings. Sir, the Arxer ships they're breaking off their attack. Regrouping at the edge of the system. A trap. Blackwood wondered aloud. No, sir. But they're definitely pulling back. Before Blackwood could process this unexpected development, his communications officer interrupted. Captain, we're receiving a new transmission. Not from Meridian Station or any coalition vessel. This is on a frequency I've never seen before. Source. The officer shook his head, bewildered. It's coming from the direction of the gas giant's outermost moon. But there's nothing there. At least, nothing on our sensors. Put it through, Blackwood ordered, tensing. If the Arxer had some hidden base in this system that even the coalition didn't know about, the transmission came through not as video, but as a cascade of symbols that flowed across his display, accompanied by a strange, rhythmic sequence of tones. For a moment, Blackwood thought their systems had malfunctioned, until the symbols began to shift, rearranging themselves into recognizable characters. We have watched. We have waited. The test continues. What the hell? Daniels murmured beside him. The message continued. Gravity manipulation detected. Precursor protocol activated. Evaluation of species 7294. A human, accelerated. Before Blackwood could respond, the sensor officer shouted in alarm. Captain! Massive energy spike from the moon's dark side. The tactical display lit up with warnings as something enormous emerged from behind the gas giant's outermost moon, a structure that dwarfed even the largest Arxer vessels. It wasn't a ship, not in any conventional sense. It resembled a vast geometric lattice, constantly shifting and reconfiguring itself, parts of it seemingly phasing in and out of existence. "Get me Meridian Station." Blackwood ordered. Chen's face reappeared on screen, her expression a mixture of confusion and awe. "Captain, are you seeing this?" "We see it," Blackwood confirmed. "Any idea what we're looking at?" It was Ambassador Thrix who answered, his voice trembling. "Not what, Captain?" "If the old texts are correct." He seemed unable to continue. On the tactical display, the Orcs fleet had completely halted its advance. Several vessels appeared to be powering down weapon systems, while others were already turning away, preparing to exit the system. "They're retreating," Lieutenant Rivera reported incredulously from his station on Meridian. "The entire Orcs armada is retreating." The strange transmission continued across all channels, now in clear, translated text. "The children fight among themselves. The cycle repeats. Yet one species has found our tools and seeks to use them. Interesting. The Orcs know to fear our return. Do you?" The lattice structure began to move, gracefully shifting position until it hung between Meridian Station and the retreating Orcs fleet. New energy signatures bloomed across its surface, and a wave of something pulsed outward, washing over Coalition and Orcs vessels alike. On the Vengeance, every system temporarily went dark before rebooting. The Gravity Lance power-up sequence had been halted, its containment fields automatically shutting down. "What just happened?" Blackwood demanded as systems came back online. Commander Daniels was checking readings, her expression baffled. "Sir, it was some kind of scanning beam. It passed through our hull like it wasn't even there. The computer says, it says our DNA was mapped. Every crew member. Simultaneously." The message returned, this time directed specifically to the Vengeance. Species 7294, a human, young but resilient. Adaptive. Resourceful. You have found one of our lesser tools and sought to wield it without understanding. Yet you fight to protect others, not merely yourselves. This is noted. The true test begins now. Without warning, the lattice structure began to expand, unfurling into a configuration that resembled an enormous gate or portal. Energy crackled along its edges as space itself seemed to warp and distort within its frame. Captain Blackwood felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. This wasn't just a new player entering the war between the Coalition and the Orcs. This changed everything. The massive portal hummed with energy, its lattice structure pulsing with colors that human eyes had never been meant to perceive. Time seemed to slow on the Vengeance's auxiliary bridge as Captain Blackwood and his crew stared at the tactical display, watching as reality itself bent within the precursor gate. "Sir," his sensor officer whispered, "something's coming through." The space within the portal rippled like disturbed water, and then, nothing. No massive fleet, no terrifying weapon. Just a single, small object, no larger than a shuttle, drifting through the threshold. Its surface was smooth, featureless, reflecting the stars around it like a perfect mirror. "Analysis?" Blackwood demanded. "Unknown composition," his science officer replied, her voice tinged with awe. "Our sensors can't penetrate it, but it's broadcasting on all frequencies." A new message scrolled across their screens. Evaluation parameters set. Coalition species have failed to advance beyond stagnation despite millennia of peace. Orcs species has embraced predation without balance. Both paths lead to extinction. Species 7294, a human, presents a third possibility. The mirror-like shuttle began to move, accelerating toward the Vengeance with impossible speed. Before Blackwood could order evasive maneuvers, it had matched velocity perfectly with the human warship, hovering just outside the hull. "It's scanning us again," reported Commander Daniels, her eyes fixed on her console. More thoroughly this time. On Meridian Station, Chen and her officers watched in stunned silence as the precursor object examined the human vessel. Ambassador Thrix stood rigid, his crystalline form vibrating slightly with what might have been fear or reverence. "The oldest texts," he said softly, "speak of the precursors not as conquerors, but as guardians. They tested developing species, judged their potential. And if a species failed their test? Chen asked, not certain she wanted the answer. Thrix's mandibles clicked once, sharply. The texts are unclear. Some suggest guidance. Others suggest pruning. Lieutenant Patel's eyes narrowed. Well, humans aren't great at being pruned. Or tested without consent, for that matter. As if in response to her words, a new message appeared. The test is not what you perceive. The Orcs were released as catalyst. The coalition was allowed to flourish as counterbalance. You were discovered by design, not on the vengeance. Blackwood's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. They engineered this entire war, he said. The Orcs, the coalition, all of it, some cosmic experiment with billions of lives at stake. The mirror shuttle pulsed once, and a section of the Vengeance's hull simply vanished. Not destroyed. There was no debris, no decompression warning. Just gone, as if it had never existed. In its place, a perfect corridor of energy connected the shuttle to the ship's interior. Security teams too, Blackwood began, but stopped as his tactical display showed a single entity moving through the corridor toward the auxiliary bridge. Not walking. Simply traversing. The bridge doors slid open. What entered wasn't a being in any conventional sense. It resembled a vertical column of liquid mercury that constantly shifted and flowed, occasionally forming suggestions of limbs or facial features before dissolving back into its fluid state. It moved to the center of the bridge, where it stopped, towering over the human crew. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Then, to Blackwood's shock, Lieutenant Patel's voice came over the comm from Meridian Station. If you're so advanced, why do you need us at all? The mercury-like figure turned toward the view screen where Patel's face was displayed. A ripple passed through its form, and for a brief moment, it mirrored her appearance perfectly before dissolving again. Potential. The word appeared in everyone's mind simultaneously, bypassing audio entirely. Entropy claims all eventually. Even US. New paths must be found. So this is an audition? Blackwood found his voice at last. Billions dead in this war just to see if humans are, what? Worthy of your attention? The precursor entity shifted again, this time forming a rough approximation of Blackwood's features. Not attention. Succession. Images flooded through every mind on the Vengeance and Meridian Station simultaneously, the rise and fall of countless civilizations across millions of years, species evolving, thriving, then faltering or destroying themselves in endless cycles. The precursors guiding, testing, searching for something that was never quite defined but viscerally understood by all who witnessed the visions. Potential successors to their self-appointed role as galactic guardians, the RX embraced only strength. The coalition only harmony. Neither alone suffices. Balance requires both. The visions shifted to Earth's history, wars and atrocities alongside moments of transcendent cooperation and compassion. Human brutality and human kindness, played out over thousands of years. You contain multitudes. You understand both the necessity of conflict and the value of peace. This makes you interesting. Commander Daniels had recovered enough to step forward, her face pale but determined. Interesting enough to stop this war? To save the billions of Li. VS still at stake. The precursors seemed to consider this, its mercurial form rippling. The war was the test. Your response to it, the measure. The Orcs will be restrained, but not removed. Balance requires pressure. Growth requires challenge. That's not good enough, Blackwood said firmly, standing to face the entity. If you have the power to restrain the Orcs, you have the power to end this cleanly. We won't be part of some cosmic experiment where real lives are treated as variables. For a long moment, the precursor didn't respond. Then, to everyone's surprise, it seemed to laugh. The sensation was impossible to describe, a ripple of something like amusement that touched every mind linked to the encounter. Defiance. Compassion. Determination. Qualities we once possessed. Perhaps. The entity flowed toward Blackwood, stopping just inches from him. A tendril of its substance extended, hovering before his face. Touch, and see the alternative. Blackwood hesitated, then reached out. As his fingers contacted the mercurial surface, new visions flooded his mind, the Orcs and similar predatory species rising unchecked throughout the galaxy, consuming civilization after civilization. The coalition species falling into deeper stagnation, eventually becoming easy prey. And humans, isolated, vulnerable, ultimately facing extinction against forces they couldn't comprehend. Then another vision, the Precursor's intervention, setting events in motion that would force adaptation, evolution, cooperation. Painful, costly in lives, but ensuring survival where otherwise there would be only extinction. The entity withdrew, and Blackwood gasped as the connection broke. "You're saying this was the gentler option?" he asked incredulously. "That the universe is not gentle. We merely tilted probabilities. Your species performed beyond parameters." The Precursor turned, its form flowing toward the energy corridor that connected to its shuttle. At the threshold, it paused, once again broadcasting to all minds. "The test concludes. The Orcs retreat. The coalition survives. Humanity rises. But this is not the end. Merely an intermission." With that, the entity vanished back through the corridor. The mirror shuttle detached from the Vengeance, gliding back toward the massive portal. As it passed through, the lattice structure began to fold in on itself, collapsing into dimensions that human instruments couldn't track, until it had vanished entirely from normal space. In its wake, the Orcs fleet continued its retreat, accelerating to faster-than-light speeds at the system's edge. The was over. At least for now. On Meridian Station, the command deck erupted in a mixture of celebration and confusion. Chen allowed herself a moment of relief before turning to Ambassador Thrix, who stood motionless, still processing what they had witnessed. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "did you understand what just happened?" Thrix's crystalline form had regained some of its luster. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we have just been graduated. Or perhaps more accurately, given a conditional passing grade." Lieutenant Patel approached them, her expression thoughtful. "It called this an intermission. Not an ending." "Indeed." Thrix's mandibles clicked softly. The Precursors have been guiding species for millions of years, pushing them towards some unknown purpose. Now, it seems, humanity has caught their attention. "Lucky us," Chen said dryly. On the Vengeance, Captain Blackwood sat heavily in his command chair, the weight of everything he'd just experienced pressing down on him. The ship's systems were gradually coming back online, damage reports flooding in from all decks. They'd survive, but the Vengeance would need extensive repairs. "Orders, sir?" Commander Daniels asked quietly. Blackwood took a deep breath, centering himself. "Contact Meridian Station. Let them know we're stable but damaged. And open a secure channel to Earth Command. They need to know everything that happened here." "Everything, sir?" Daniels raised an eyebrow. "About the Precursors?" "Especially about the Precursors." Blackwood's expression was grim. "Because I don't think this is over. Not by a long shot." As the communications officer carried out his orders, Blackwood turned to the tactical display, now showing the retreating signatures of the Orcs fleet. The Precursor had said they would be restrained, but not removed. A pressure, a challenge, to keep the coalition species and humanity from growing complacent. But there was something else, something the Precursor had shown him in that brief mental contact that it hadn't shared with the others. A glimpse of something vast and dark, lurking in the spaces between galaxies. Something that even the Precursors feared, something they were preparing the younger species to face. "Sir?" Daniels was looking at him with concern. "Are you all right?" Blackwood nodded slowly, his decision made. "Tell Earth Command we're going to need more ships. A lot more ships." In the vast emptiness at the edge of the system, undetectable by any coalition or human sensors, the mirror shuttle hovered, observing. Inside, the mercurial entity communed with others of its kind across dimensions human minds couldn't comprehend. Assessment complete. Species 7294, human, shows highest compatibility index IN 42 million cycles. Proceed TO Phase 2. The shuttle shimmered once, then vanished, leaving no trace of its presence except a subtle alteration in the quantum structure of spacetime, a marker that would remain dormant for precisely 1 Earth year. When it reactivated, the true test would begin. 3 weeks after the precursor encounter, the Vengeance hung in dry dock alongside Meridian Station, its battle-scarred hull illuminated by the floodlights of repair drones. The damage was extensive, nearly a third of the ship's systems remained offline, and the port side still bore the blackened scars of Orcs weapons fire. But like its crew, the vessel had survived against impossible odds. Captain Blackwood stood at the viewport in what had become the de facto headquarters for the newly formed Human Coalition Joint Command. Behind him, representatives from 12 coalition species sat alongside officers from Earth's defense forces, all gathered around a holographic display of known space. The Orcs have withdrawn to these sectors, Lieutenant Rivera explained, highlighting a cluster of systems at the edge of coalition territory. They've established a defensive perimeter but have made no aggressive moves since the encounter. Our long-range scans suggest they're rebuilding, but not expanding. And we're certain they're actually being restrained, as the precursor claimed, asked Admiral Hayes, the silver-haired woman who had arrived from Earth just days ago with the first wave of human reinforcements. Ambassador Thrix inclined his crystalline head. As certain as we can be without direct confirmation. The Orcs were known for their relentless expansion. This sudden containment is unprecedented. And likely temporary, Blackwood added, turning from the viewport. The past 3 weeks had aged him. New lines marked his face, and a thin streak of gray had appeared at his temple. The precursor called this an intermission, not an ending. Admiral Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Which is why Earth has authorized our new shipbuilding program. The Vengeance was just the prototype. The next generation will incorporate what we've learned, both from this battle and from the precursor encounter. The Coalition Council has voted similarly, Commander Chen reported. She had received a field promotion after her leadership during the battle. For the first time in our history, we're establishing a true unified military force. Ambassador Thrix has been instrumental in pushing these reforms through. The Vari diplomat's exoskeleton shimmered with what those who knew him recognized as embarrassment. I merely reminded the Council of what we all witnessed. The precursors favored humanity precisely because they balance cooperation with the capacity for necessary conflict. It seems wise to learn from that example. Lieutenant Patel, now serving as the human liaison to Meridian Station, smiled slightly. Are you saying the mighty coalition is taking lessons from us primitives? I am saying, Thrix replied with uncharacteristic warmth, that perhaps we have all been blind in different ways. The coalition sought harmony at the cost of growth. The Orcs embraced conflict without purpose. Humanity, you walk a different path. A messy one, Commander Daniels commented from her position beside Blackwood. Her arm was still in a sling, healing from injuries sustained during the battle. Messy, yes, Thrix agreed. But vital. Your history is filled with conflict, yet you consistently emerge from your darkest moments with renewed purpose. You fight to protect, not merely to conquer. The precursors recognized this quality. A hush fell over the room at the mention of the enigmatic beings. In the weeks since their appearance, every scientist in both human and coalition society had been analyzing the data from the encounter. The results were both fascinating and frustrating. The precursors operated with technology so advanced it might as well be magic to current understanding. What about the quantum marker? Blackwood asked, breaking the silence. He had shared the vision of the greater threat with Earth Command and the coalition leadership, a decision that had accelerated cooperation between the formerly separate powers. Unchanged, Rivera reported. Our best analysts confirm it's dormant, just as you described. Set to activate in approximately 11 months, 3 days. Admiral Hayes straightened. Then we have work to do. Captain Blackwood, once the Vengeance is repaired, you'll be taking command of our first joint fleet. 6 Earth vessels and 8 coalition ships, with crews from both. Blackwood nodded, accepting the responsibility without hesitation. And our mission? Exploration and preparation, Hayes replied. We need to understand what's out there, what the precursors are preparing us for. Commander Chen will serve as your executive officer, with Ambassador Thrix as diplomatic liaison. Chen looked surprised but pleased by the assignment. The Coalition Council approved this? Unanimously, Thrix confirmed. You've earned their trust, Commander. As have all of you. His gaze swept across the human officers. When the Vengeance entered battle against the Orcs, it changed everything. Not just the war but how we see ourselves and each other. Outside the viewport, a squadron of small craft zipped past, training exercises for the first Joint Human Coalition fighter wing. Pilots from 6 different species learning to work together, communicate, coordinate. Preparations for whatever might come when the quantum marker activated. Later that evening, Blackwood stood alone on the observation deck, watching as the last of the day's light faded from the gas giant that dominated Meridian's sky. His mind kept returning to the Precursor's words, "You contain multitudes. You understand both the necessity of conflict and the value of peace." He felt rather than heard Commander Chen approach, her footsteps nearly silent on the deck's smooth surface. "Credit for your thoughts, Captain?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Blackwood smiled slightly. "I was thinking about history. How one moment can change everything. The Precursor encounter. But also the moment when a single human warship entered a battle everyone thought was lost." He turned to face her. "What do you think would have happened if the Vengeance hadn't come?" Chen considered this. The Orcs would have continued their advance. More colonies would have fallen. Eventually, perhaps Earth too. And now. She looked out at the stars, at the ships moving between Meridian and the newly established joint base. Now we have a chance. Not just to survive, but to become something new. Something better than either of us were alone. Blackwood nodded. Exactly what the Precursors wanted. Does that bother you? Being part of their grand experiment? He thought about it, remembering the vision the mercurial being had shared, the darkness between galaxies, the threat that loomed beyond current understanding. No. Because I think they need us as much as we needed them. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than any of us. Chen smiled, surprising him. Then we'll face it together. Human and Coalition, united at last. As if in answer, the Vengeance's running lights came on, systems powering up after weeks of repairs. The great warship seemed to glow against the darkness, a symbol of resilience and unexpected hope. Whatever the Precursors had planned for Phase 2, whatever threat lurked in the cosmic darkness, humanity would not face it alone. And perhaps that had been the point all along, not merely a test, but a lesson. The war had shifted. And with it, the future of all species in the galaxy.